He was the face of hope, the young farm boy who became a legend in a galaxy far, far away. For millions, Mark Hamill will forever be Luke Skywalker, the hero who fought darkness with courage and faith. But behind the lightsabers, the fame, and the endless cheers lies a story very few truly know. At 74, the man who gave the world one of its most beloved heroes carries scars, some seen, many unseen. His journey through Hollywood has been marked by incredible triumphs and devastating heartbreaks. From a near-fatal accident that almost ended his career, to years of being overshadowed by the very role that made him famous, Hamill's life became a quiet battle against typecasting, loneliness and loss. And while fans saw the charming, witty actor on screen, they didn't see the pain of watching opportunities fade, or the struggles he faced behind the spotlight. Now, decades later, Mark Hamill finally reveals the truth about fame, aging, and what it really cost to be Luke Skywalker, because even heroes grow old. And sometimes, the real battles happen far away from the cameras. This is the heartbreaking story of Mark Hamill, the man behind the legend. Before the galaxy knew his name, Mark Hamill was just another young dreamer in Hollywood, uncertain, ambitious, and struggling to find his place. Born in Oakland, California in 1951, Mark was one of 7 children in a military family that moved constantly. His father, a Navy captain, instilled discipline, while his mother nurtured creativity. It was a balance that shaped him, strict structure wrapped around a wildly imaginative heart. As a child, Mark found escape in comic books, radio dramas, and the silver screen. Heroes fascinated him, not because they were strong, but because they were good. That sense of morality would later define his most famous role. After studying drama at Los Angeles City College, Hamill began his career like many young actors of his generation, with guest roles on television. He appeared in shows like The Bill Cosby Show, General Hospital, and The Partridge Family, learning the craft, paying his dues, and waiting for the right break. That break came in 1976, when a young filmmaker named George Lucas was casting for a strange space adventure no one had heard of, something called Star Wars. Hamill, then 25, auditioned for the role of a naive farm boy who dreams of the stars. No one, not Lucas, not Hamill, not anyone, could have imagined what would follow. When Star Wars hit theaters in 1977, it didn't just change cinema. It changed culture. Overnight, Mark Hamill became the face of a movement, a symbol of innocence and hope in a world gripped by cynicism. Children saw Luke Skywalker as their hero, and adults saw him as the embodiment of something pure, a light in the darkness. But fame came fast, and Hamill wasn't ready. He wasn't a seasoned celebrity or a Hollywood insider. He was a shy, thoughtful artist suddenly thrust into the biggest phenomenon the world had ever seen. Behind the smiles and interviews, he struggled with the pressure of expectations. Everywhere he went, people saw Luke, not Mark. He loved the character deeply, but feared being trapped by it. Even as The Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi solidified his legacy, Hamill's identity became harder to separate from the myth he'd helped create. Then, tragedy struck. In 1977, just before The Empire Strikes Back began filming, Mark was in a devastating car accident. The crash left his face severely injured, his nose and cheekbone shattered. Surgeons worked for hours to repair the damage, but the scars never fully healed. For a young actor, it was a crushing blow. When audiences saw him again in Empire, some noticed the subtle differences in his features, unaware of the pain and fear behind them. Hamill rarely spoke about it, but those close to him said the accident changed him forever. It humbled him, deepened him, and left him with an understanding of fragility that would later shape his performances. Through it all, he remained dedicated to the craft. He wasn't chasing fame, he wanted meaning. And when Star Wars ended in 1983, Hamill hoped to reinvent himself, to prove that he could be more than Luke Skywalker. But Hollywood had already made up its mind. The studios saw a hero in a galaxy far, far away, not the complex, versatile actor behind him. And for Mark Hamill, that realization marked the beginning of a long, heartbreaking struggle, one that would test his spirit and nearly break him. When the Star Wars trilogy came to an end in 1983, Mark Hamill stood at a crossroads. He had gone from an unknown actor to an international icon, loved, idolized, and forever tied to one of the most beloved characters in film history. But for Hamill, that fame came with an invisible weight. The world only saw Luke Skywalker. Hollywood saw him as nothing else. In the years after Return of the Jedi, Hamill faced the cold truth of typecasting. The same role that made him a legend had become a cage. Casting directors couldn't look past the lightsaber. Scripts stopped coming. The phone rarely rang. While his co-stars Harrison Ford and Carrie Fisher found steady work, Ford becoming a major box office star, Hamill quietly struggled. He took roles in small independent films, theater productions, and television guest spots, desperate to show he was more than a single character. Yet no matter what he did, audiences still whispered one name: Luke. It wasn't that Hamill lacked talent. Quite the opposite. His performances were often praised for their sincerity and depth. But Hollywood has a short memory, and even shorter imagination. The boy from Tatooine had become both his blessing and his curse. Behind the scenes, Hamill wrestled with frustration and self-doubt. Friends described him as kind and humorous, but introspective, a man torn between gratitude and resentment. He loved Star Wars, but it had consumed his identity. During interviews, he often laughed off the typecasting, calling himself lucky to have been part of something so big. But those who knew him best said the laughter masked real pain. The industry that once embraced him now looked the other way. When acting opportunities slowed, Hamill turned to the stage, performing on Broadway in plays like The Elephant Man and Amadeus. There, he rediscovered his passion for storytelling, free from the glare of movie fame. Audiences applauded his skill, but the mainstream media barely noticed. By the late 1980s, Hamill faced another setback. His film career had stalled completely. He began accepting roles in low-budget productions, sometimes working just to keep his name alive. Yet through it all, he remained grounded. He never sought pity, only purpose. Then came an unexpected twist. In the early 1990s, Hamill discovered a new world that would reignite his creativity: voice acting. With a unique range and expressive tone, he found his second calling behind the microphone. And when he voiced the Joker in Batman, the animated series in 1992, the industry finally took notice again. The performance was chilling, brilliant, a complete transformation from the pure-hearted hero he'd once played. Critics and fans were stunned. Hamill wasn't just Luke Skywalker anymore. He was the Joker, unhinged, complex, unforgettable. For years, he lent his voice to animation, video games, and audiobooks, carving a new legacy for himself. It was a quiet comeback, built not on fame but on passion. Yet even with this success, Hamill couldn't escape the long shadow of Luke. As Star Wars became myth, Hamill became its symbol. Every interview, every appearance, every headline, it always led back to the galaxy he'd tried to move beyond. He accepted it gracefully, but deep down, the struggle never ended. Fame had given him everything, and taken just as much away. The tragedy of Mark Hamill was no longer about lost opportunities. It was about identity. The man who brought light to millions was quietly searching for his own. By the time the 2000s arrived, Mark Hamill had become something rare in Hollywood, a man respected but often forgotten by the mainstream. He was still beloved by fans of Star Wars and animation. Yet the glamorous spotlight that once followed him had long dimmed. He lived quietly with his wife, Marilu York, a dental hygienist he married in 1978, long before the fame took over. While many stars of his era chased attention and status, Hamill chose family. Together they raised 3 children, away from the chaos of Hollywood. It was a life of peace, but also of reflection, and sometimes regret. As the years passed, Hamill watched his co-stars battle their own demons. Carrie Fisher struggled with addiction and mental health. Harrison Ford endured personal heartbreaks and near-death accidents. But when Carrie passed away suddenly in 2016, something inside Hamill broke. The world mourned Princess Leia. But for Mark, it wasn't just a co-star he'd lost. It was a sister. For 40 years, Carrie had been his closest companion in the Star Wars family. Someone who understood the burden of fame like no one else could. After her death, Hamill confessed, "It's never going to be the same. We just took it for granted we'd have more time." That loss haunted him. When he later returned to Star Wars in The Last Jedi, the emotions on his face were not just acting. They were grief made visible. Fans saw Luke Skywalker saying goodbye, but behind those scenes stood a man saying farewell to his past. Aging in Hollywood is never kind, especially for someone who was once the face of youth and heroism. Hamill began to feel the cruel passage of time, not just in his appearance, but in the way the world saw him. Interviews grew fewer. Awards went elsewhere. He had become a living legend, but legends are often lonely. In public, he joked about his age, his beard, and his legacy. But in private, friends say he often reflected on what might have been, the roles he never got, the films he never made, the recognition that slipped away. For decades, he had watched as younger actors rose to stardom in the same system that once rejected him. Still, Hamill never grew bitter. He found gratitude in the fans who never forgot him, and pride in the new generation who discovered his work through Star Wars and animation. Yet, there was always that quiet ache, the knowledge that he had given his youth to a character so powerful that it consumed everything else. As he entered his 70s, Hamill began speaking more openly about the realities of fame, loss, and purpose. He admitted that he had once felt lost after Star Wars, unsure of who he was without Luke Skywalker. "You can't live as your character," he said, "but people expect you to." In his eyes, the tragedy of Mark Hamill was never about failure. It was about being remembered only for one thing, when he had so much more to give. He watched his reflection change over the decades, from the young dreamer on Tatooine to the older man burdened by the years. But beneath it all, his heart remained the same, kind, humble, endlessly grateful for the chance to have touched the world, even if it cost him a piece of himself. At 74, Mark Hamill has become something far greater than a movie star. He is a symbol, not only of the magic of Star Wars, but of the resilience behind it. Yet behind his humor and humility lies the quiet ache of a man who has lived his entire life in the shadow of his own legend. When fans see him today, smiling at conventions, signing autographs, or joking on social media, they see the same twinkle that once lit up the galaxy. But few realize the weight that smile carries, the decades of struggle, the loneliness, the fading dreams that never came to be. Hamill once said, "It's a strange thing to be remembered forever for something you did when you were young." And for him, that truth is both beautiful and cruel. He has watched generations grow up with Luke Skywalker as their hero, even as he grew old, trying to live up to that image. In recent years, he has spoken candidly about aging, loss, and the passage of time. He's admitted that fame, no matter how bright, eventually fades, and that peace comes only when you stop fighting it. He now spends his time mentoring younger artists, supporting independent projects, and advocating for kindness and empathy, values that echo the very lessons of the Jedi he once portrayed. Yet, there are still moments when the pain surfaces. The absence of his closest friends, Carrie Fisher and the late Peter Mayhew, lingers. The Star Wars reunions that once felt like family gatherings are now tinged with melancholy. The laughter is softer, the memories heavier. Hamill has said that reprising Luke in The Last Jedi and The Rise of Skywalker was both an honor and a farewell. It gave him closure, not just as an actor, but as a man. It was like saying goodbye to an old friend, he confessed. The final scenes, where Luke fades into the sunset, mirrored his own acceptance, the passing of an era, the end of the myth. But perhaps that's where the tragedy of Mark Hamill transforms into something more profound. Because even after all the struggles, the disappointments, and the years of being misunderstood, Hamill never stopped believing in the goodness of people. He never lost the joy of storytelling or the humility that made him loved in the first place. He remains deeply connected to his fans, always approachable, always genuine. While others chase relevance, Hamill embraces gratitude. He knows that even though Hollywood may have moved on, Millions of hearts never did. In a world obsessed with youth and fame, Mark Hamill stands as a rare reminder that legacy isn't built on awards or headlines. It's built on love, endurance, and truth. The tragedy of Mark Hamill isn't that he was forgotten. It's that he gave so much of himself to a dream that the world could never fully repay. Yet, in that sacrifice lies his greatest triumph. Because Mark Hamill didn't just play a hero, he became one in the quiet human way that matters most. And as the stars fade and time moves on, one truth remains. Luke Skywalker may belong to the galaxy, but Mark Hamill belongs to all of us.